My name is Jenna Hopkins. I'm an occupational therapist who's working with long COVID, Ehlers-Danlos hypermobility, and dysautonomia, including POTS. This is my talk about autonomic conditioning therapy. What is it? Autonomic conditioning therapy tries to monitor your response to all activities, but keep you in the rest and recovery zone. So heart rate variability is a helpful measure of this. It's a measurement of the variance in time intervals between successive heartbeats, and it's a valid and reliable predictor of the sympathetic and parasympathetic balance in the body. There are some factors that can impact your HRV, and that's going to include your physical activity, your medications, supplements, drugs, and alcohol, your nutritional status and hormones, genetics, breathing patterns, emotional stressors, illness, age, gender, and ethnicity. So your autonomic nervous system is divided up into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Your sympathetic nervous system is activated by stress, but it can also be activated by exercise. So usually we are doing that to help to train our body, but it can be interpreted as a negative stressor. If you are exercising too much, then that actually creates something called overtraining syndrome, where you have overactivated your sympathetic nervous system without the appropriate amount of recovery and rest time. And so that will decrease your HRV, that will reduce your performance, and it will create fatigue. However, rest and recovery activates the parasympathetic nervous system, and that is where you can rest, digest, and where your body can grow and repair. So that is going to lead to increasing HRV, increased performance, and increased readiness. So it is essential to make sure you have the ability to down-regulate the stress responses before moving on to more challenging activities. The problem is a lot of people that have dysautonomia or long COVID are not familiar with how to do that because their ability levels have shifted so much since getting sick. So many people are stuck in this push-crash cycle. I tell people immediately we need to get you out of the push crash cycle as soon as possible. The longer you are there, the more likely you are to not be able to break out of this cycle, and the more likely you are to decrease your readiness, increase your fatigue, and lead to new and worsening symptoms. It's not only a cycle, it's actually a downward spiral. So this is just a reminder that I have a whole series about managing post-exertional symptom exacerbation and post-exertional malaise, and that is a symptom of exercise intolerance. It is only mimicked by ME/CFS. Physical activity and exercise interventions warrant caution as rehab strategies amongst people with long COVID and ME/CFS. And persistent symptoms of disproportionate breathlessness on exertion, inappropriately high heartbeat, tachycardia, and/or chest pain. Graded exercise therapy should not be used, particularly when post-exertional symptom exacerbations are present. This is not deconditioning. People are using their energy differently. People's threshold for aerobic activity is different. People's consumption of oxygen is different. People's heart rate is different. So this is not deconditioning. And again, please check my series about post-exertional malaise to get that additional info. So phase 1 is really all about stabilization. And this is where we hear about the pacing principles. But this has to be done before you can move on to additional phases. So you must learn to prevent overexertion in the push-crash cycle and how to manage those symptoms. Learning to pace, optimizing sleep, putting tools in place to support your healing, learning your triggers and how to eliminate unnecessary stressors, learning how to rest and calm your body, improving hydration and use of healing foods, and integrating changes to your lifestyle activity routines to assess impact on symptoms. Breath control during activities and during the day is extremely important because this is how most people are directly able to access their sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So you need to notice and correct for any quick and shallow breathing with either rest breaks and activity modifications, and then use more conscious breathing strategies. My favorite is Just Buteyko on YouTube, or any basic Buteyko breathing strategies by author Patrick McCowan. He has multiple books out there. So I'm just referencing back those other videos where we're talking about people spending most of the time in the easy zone, doing 20 or 30% of what they think they can do, even then taking consistent rest breaks. Challenging activities throughout the day, usually for up to about 15 minutes at a time, at about 50% of what you think you can do, where you are provided some challenge, but that you completely avoid the danger zone. Some other tools, this is a trigger analysis. So you want to make sure you're doing something where you are tracking your symptoms and your crashes, trying to figure out what is affecting your system. So this might include fatigue levels, pain, sleep quality, your most debilitating symptoms, and then make sure that you are tracking any crashes and try to find patterns of why you might be crashing. So it might be because of sleep differences, stress and anxiety, dehydration, weather changes, PMS, alcohol, sensory overload, environmental exposures, you're getting sick with something that's new, or you started a new medication or supplement. Some other tools are going to be time blocks or daily checklists, and this is just to make sure you're adhering to pacing as much as possible. You can use METs, which is metabolic equivalent of task, and that is to make sure that all the activities you are performing are kind of in the light exercise or moderate exercise. This does change a bit from person to person. A person that has POTS and Ehlers-Danlos hypermobility usually have worsening symptoms with standing still or with lifting and maintaining their arms at position. So those activities might knock them out a bit more than other people. I have, for example, people that have crashes related to sweeping and vacuuming frequently because their arms are up for extended periods of time. And then just knowing all activities are going to be harder if you're stressed out, if they're noisy, if the temperature is higher, if you're dehydrated, or you have other triggers going on. Other tools for stabilization, again, you want to be taking your HRV measurements consistently. So Visible does that first thing in the morning. There's other apps that might be taking it overnight, or that might be taking it at various points throughout the day. You just want to make sure you're using the same device or the same app very consistently, so that way you can see your HRV changes over time. Something else that I highly recommend is using a pedometer or a step counter. And again, that is very common in wearable devices. And that is helping you to have that consistent activity level. Instead of having a step goal, you kind of have a minimum and a maximum that are your steps, and you try and stay inside that zone. So you want to meet but not exceed the top of that. If you are not walking or doing much, you might even use a consistent amount of time per day upright as your guide, because that activity is challenging enough. And then the last thing is really making sure that you are aware of your breath no matter what activity you are doing. Additionally, you need to understand the difference between running on adrenaline versus real energy. So being able to notice your bodily reactions to activities, your warning signs, and your breath is huge. So there are a lot of activities you can do in phase 1, and I wanted to make sure that I put these in. These are going to be almost healing for everybody. There might not be studies out on any one specific activity, but as long as it feels like it is a calming activity for you, then fantastic, keep doing it. Breathing exercises top the list: coherent or resonant breathing, prone, which is lying on your tummy, and supine diaphragm breathing, alternate nostril breathing, and then things that are actively requiring breath control, and that's going to be things like reading out loud, humming, singing, blowing up balloons. That is actually the very first exercises I want people to be doing. Other things, you can do gentle movement and varied positions of rest, like legs up the wall, gentle stretching. Make sure you're avoiding going to end ranges if you're hypermobile. Rocking in a chair or using a hammock. That kind of helps your proprioceptive system as well as your vestibular system. Meditation or yoga nidra. Seated on an exercise ball with a tall posture for tolerable lengths of time. Facial gua sha or face yoga. Dry brushing and self-massage. Acupuncture, foot reflexology, craniosacral therapy, aromatherapy, binaural music, healing music, slightly cold showers or ice pack applications to your head or the back of the neck, getting outside or grounding, and vagus nerve stimulation, including electrical or exercises. So phase 1, you want to spend at least 2 weeks having a stable system prior to adding in any additional activities and exercises. Signs of a stable system include the following: no big crashes. So it might be like, oh, I maybe slightly overdid it, but then I recovered from the activity by the next day. You want a stable HRV and resting heart rate at your morning check-in. You want consistent eating patterns, sleep patterns, and water consumption to support your healing. You want to be able to notice and correct for breathlessness and symptom flares in real time. You want to have that consistent movement patterns using scheduled activities or step count. If you are unable to stabilize using these tools, then you will likely need increased medical management, including medication or testing for food intolerances and nutritional deficiencies for supplements. If you have additional illness or acute stressors, you have to come back to phase 1 and repeat the process. So if you go through any crashes where it feels like you're just not recovering, you need to come back to phase 1 and get your system stabilized again. Make sure you have had a basic medical checkup and medical clearance for any additional activities prior to advancing to phase 2. So especially if you're having cardiac symptoms, make sure that gets checked out. Avoid adding supplements unless recommended by a doctor after completing a nutritional deficiencies test while in phase 1, because your symptoms aren't stable yet, so it's hard to tell if anything's helping or hurting. Never forget the importance of basic health principles: rest, sleep, good nutrition, stress management, breath work, and hydration. Okay, so our next video is going to be about the other phases of recovery, so please check that out. You can go to my website for additional information or to my YouTube channel for additional videos.